I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And this is David McCarricker with Why Left.
So today on Why Left, Dave is going to show me some clips from the internet that may or may not displease me. And then we're going to talk about some of what's been going on in Ukraine and some of the new innovations going on at TU in the podcasting space.
Yeah, the podcasting space with big weird quotes around the word, because what the hell is a podcast anymore? People see that I do stuff on YouTube and then they say, I see that you're podcasting, in reference to stuff that is like what, streams? And then we have, Joe Rogan is a podcaster, but if you look it up on Spotify, there's actual video for it. So there's this weird sort of like video. Is video podcasting now? And kind of yes, because also like obviously this is clearly a podcast that we're doing. We've called it a podcast and it's on podcast platforms, but also it's a YouTube live stream. And so it's weird to be sort of between the sort of streamer thing and the podcaster thing. And at the same time, all of this is supposed to just be a media arm for a lecture course, an ongoing research seminar, and book publishing platform. And so trying to get all that stuff to fit together is making me go crazy today.
Yeah, I think we've reached a weird point where calling yourself a podcaster rather than a streamer is a way of upselling or upscaling the thing that you're doing. Imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what that is? I guess so. Cause I mean, if you're making podcasts, then at least you've got episodes. And I think people have this idea with the stream that it's like this sort of indefinite, like it just goes on forever. And you play video games while reacting to clips, right? I think that's what people have in their mind.
Vulgar Zoomer children is what they think of when you say stream. When you say podcast, you think of elder millennial, with show notes.
Yeah, there we go. And that's true. I do want everyone to know we do have elder millennials in mind, and we do have show notes. God damn it. Okay. So this is a very mature podcast, and we are not here for the Zoomers, not at all. In fact, I just told someone today, please take me off your list. They kept sending me, oh, there's this amazing opportunity to have this young voice on your channel. And I said, please take me off your list. We're not interested in young voices. And I want to just clarify, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I've had like 5 people reach out and say that they have something special to offer to you because they bring a Zoomer perspective. And I just wanted all the Zoomers to know, if you see yourself as a Zoomer, this just might not be the right fit for you. Nothing against anybody who might belong to that generation, but the generation I'm preparing myself to speak to is not even born yet. So for now, we want to focus on what we even mean by preparing ourselves. That kind of preparation is something that I talked about a little bit in my first book, Waypoint, in the introduction, when I said that I'm giving myself 5 years to develop myself to write to the parents of the people who will be 25 and 30 years, right? This is just like a way of giving myself the time and the context of even having to say that is just like, when people are reading theory, it's either too popular or it's too ivory tower, and jargon filled. And my point was, well, rather than trying to hone the craft of speaking to either of those two audiences, I'm going to prioritize my own intellectual development and my attempt to try to grasp the situation that we're in without regard to hypothetical audiences, without regard to rhetoric at all. And of course, that's impossible because I get this constant feedback loop of people who as we put stuff out, either do or do not understand things. And so, hypothetically, I have this operating assumption of, no, I'm just trying to get a grasp on the situation and having a conversation with this tight knit group. But in reality, we're still out here doing stuff in public, or at least on the internet. And so, but this all ties in to what we're about to play, which is a clip from David Pakman complaining about how he's losing a lot of followers in the wake of the election of Donald Trump, the second election of Donald Trump. And so we'll play that in a moment, but let's engage with the chat here a little bit. I want to start with this guy, James said, I think he's referring to me. It said he's calling me Gabe, but it's Dave. He's saying, Dave might be the first radical centrist I've ever seen. He needs to talk to J-Reg. And I just wanted
Dave,
you to know.
haven't you talked to J-Reg?
I have talked to J-Reg. Yeah. I didn't realize that J-Reg is a radical centrist. I kind of like that idea of radical centrism, but it's also something that I think people already are doing over at American Affairs. Like Michael Lind, I think, refers to himself as a radical centrist.
There's that also term's been around for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it make you think of, this term?
Emmanuel Macron.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's in Europe how he was often described when he came in, as someone with centrist politics, but who wants to make large-scale sweeping changes in France, like raising the retirement age and making it easier to fire people.
Wonderful. That's radical. Yeah. So not exactly a term that I would take on willingly. But I mean, one way of saying it could be something like large scale change that would radically transform all existing institutions and the work-life balance for all people on the planet would have to include some kind of cultural centrism, because it means
people might just
mean
it
everybody.
In terms of just being a moderate on social issues, of just being reasonable on social issues, because so often left and right is framed purely in terms of social issues and the culture war. When people use the term centrist to describe you, they might just mean that you don't have a crazy take on social issues, that you seem reasonable but radical in other areas or aspects. I think that is perhaps a symptom of the degree to which the culture war and the social issues have dominated the discussion, to the point at which your position on those issues is considered more important in defining you ideologically than anything else.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, but we'll work on my labels later. For now, I am the person who is completely unconvinced that there is a functioning label that could get us anywhere, and I'll just hold to that for the time being. But let's pull it up though. This is the clip. Let's see if we can get it up here on the screen. Gotta tweak a couple things on my side, and then let's hit the share button and see if that works. Can everybody see that? Yes. You can see that, right, Benjamin?
Oh, yes.
All right. So this is the David Pakman Show. Fun fact, Benjamin Studebaker was on the David Pakman Show once upon a time. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it was during the 2020 primary. I was on there to discuss Elizabeth Warren. Pakman had an audience which included both Sanders and Warren supporters, and so he was trying to host a dialogue among them so as to keep all of them in the audience and not alienate one or the other. So as part of this discussion about Warren, I was invited on.
Yeah, and so that's something that you can still look up if you were to type David Pakman, Benjamin Studebaker, Elizabeth Warren. But let's get after it. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit go on this. The title of this video by David Pakman is "I'm Terrified," in all caps. Is the left about to abandon politics? And this was published at this point 2 weeks ago, but this is right after the election. Let's go. It's not loading. Okay.
Yeah,
Hold on.
we have a little sluggishness on the part of this clip.
I'm going to tell you something that is terrifying me. I always try to come here and put a positive face on everything, but there is something going on that is terrifying me. When I woke up this morning, we had lost.
Oh, come on.
We are having
Maybe if I
buffering issues.
let's
Oh
lower
no.
let's lower
Audio quality?
yeah, or the video
Something's
or
going on in Idaho.
yeah, I'll lose the internet this time. We'll see. Is stream coming through okay, everybody? Yeah, not good. Uh Look, guys, if it's not going to play, we'll just go ahead and say it, but
Yeah,
I mean,
you could
come on
summarize
though.
it.
I could. Okay, well, here we have David Pakman face palming in the picture. It's got Donald Trump laughing. And what he ends up showing, I can't believe it's stalling out like this, though. How am I even maintaining stream right now if it's stalling out that bad? Let's do a internet speed test while I talk. But basically, David Pakman lost thousands of subscribers in a very short amount of time after the election of Donald Trump. And a big part of the reason is likely because of his predictions. Sam Seder's predictions. Everybody was pretty sure that they had this election in the bag. There's no reason that this is being so slow. I don't know what's going on, but we'll just move on from trying to share the clip and we'll just chat about it. So Benjamin, basically he talks about how he's terrified because when the left starts to lose, it goes and hides and nurses its wounds. But when the right loses, this might be something you've heard before, because I think I've heard this before. When the right loses, they get down and they organize and they solicit money from billionaires. But when the left loses, it goes and hides and licks its wounds or gets depressed or whatever. And that's basically Pakman's analysis. And the other part is that this isn't just him. He made phone calls, he talked to Sam Seder, and he listed off a bunch of other lefty news people. And basically they were all saying, yeah, no, this is a thing for us as well. And so basically there is a mass exodus occurring from left-wing alternative news content. What do you make of that, Benjamin?
Well, I think people are tired of following media sources that are giving them information that then turns out to not be accurate. If you are listening to MSNBC or some of these YouTube shows, you were hearing a narrative about what was going on that turned out to not be true. So therefore, either you're being propagandized or the people who are making this content are just making a lot of mistakes. And whichever one it is, if they're not willing to admit and reckon with the mistakes that they made, if they're in denial about it, then you're not going to be able to work through the questions that are raised by those predictions having been wrong. I think anybody who comments is going to be wrong about some things. I've been wrong about some things just in the time that we've been doing this show. I was wrong about the Marco Rubio Secretary of State pick, right? But, we can have a discussion about what can be learned from that. What does it mean that Marco Rubio was picked? Well, it means that the Trump administration has a much greater interest in pleasing the establishment than maybe I thought at the time that I said that, right? Because Marco Rubio is Jeb Bush's protege. There's clearly an effort going on to include the neoconservatives in the administration. Perhaps that's because there's a feeling that in the Senate, this is a significant constituency that must be appeased and that might plausibly vote down other people like Hegseth or RFK or Tulsi Gabbard. Perhaps some of these people are in danger, and maybe they think that by picking Marco Rubio, they'll buy some positive feedback. Or maybe it is genuinely the case that the Trump administration's foreign policy isn't as far away from the Marco Rubio-Jeb Bush policy as people would have liked to have thought, right? There are some things we can learn by considering what it means to have thought that, come on, he's not going to pick Rubio, right? And then he does. If you take that seriously and think about what does it mean? How might I have been wrong? What is it that we can learn from it? we can grow as a between me and you guys listening, we can grow and learn things over time. But if when something terrible happens, you insist that, oh, no, no, I was right about everything. And actually, everybody else is stupid and wrong. And you just start foaming at the mouth and going crazy and going, I'm terrified that people aren't listening to me anymore. People are not going to think that this is a reasonable way of getting a perspective. Yeah, and to give you one straightforward example, Alan Lichtman, the Keys guy, he's been doing all kinds of media and he's been getting very upset because people have said, hey, man, you called this one wrong. Instead of having a sober analysis of why did I get that wrong? What might I have misunderstood? He's just going crazy and getting very upset and looking increasingly disheveled in the videos. Clearly, the guy is having a hard time. And he shouldn't be on streams when he's feeling this way. People should not get on and talk if they're not in the right headspace to do it justice. And this is a guy who clearly took his theory of the keys too seriously. Any theory, this is something that when I was at University of Chicago doing my master's, John Mearsheimer made this point. No theory is right 100% of the time, and no theorist calls everything right. A theory is useful if it helps you understand things more often than other competing theories that you could apply in the same situations, right? A theory doesn't get everything right because all theories are simplifications of reality. All accounts of what's going on involve deciding these are the things that are really important and these other factors, they don't matter as much, so that the brain can process all the different variables, right? But if you insist that the set of heuristics you used, the theory that you operated with, can't be proven wrong by facts, and that you don't have to try to refine it or learn things from it or qualify it when it gets predictions wrong, then you're engaged in a kind of dogmatism or cult building exercise. The Keys guy actually said in one of these videos, don't blaspheme me, as if he's a religious figure who is being, if he's criticized or if people refuse to listen to his expertise or to defer to him, that they're committing an act of blasphemy, like he's some kind of priest in the Middle Ages that you're obligated to obey. What
Whoa.
on earth is that? This kind of talk
What?
is not healthy. And it
Yeah.
reflects, people who have a sense of self and a sense of what they're doing and who they are that's not accurate. Anybody who does real theory seriously understands that we are all limited in what we're able to know. But if you're trying to market yourself as somebody who gets everything right, is never wrong, is cleverer than everybody else, you're going to find that eventually you're going to make mistakes. And when you do, you're not going to have a way of explaining that to your audience that they're going to regard as sufficient because you have misled them about your ability to grasp the situation. We all make mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, by the way, on Ukraine, if I
Mm,
can bring in Ukraine here a little bit, a lot of
please.
us made mistakes about Ukraine when that conflict kicked off. A lot of us thought, A, that when the United States said that Russia was preparing to invade, that couldn't possibly be true. And then B, many people thought when Russia did invade that its invasion would be more successful than it was and quicker, right? Now, what happened when those predictions were false is that most people ran away from those predictions and acted like they never made them and just moved on because their interest was in trying to seem competent to their audience so their audience would continue to give money, right? But what does it mean to actually have gotten that wrong? Well, what it means is that the American intelligence services are more competent with respect to what's going on in that part of the world than most of us who are critics of US foreign policy believe. Now, that doesn't mean they're right about everything or every part of the world. The quality of intelligence varies depending on time and place. For instance, during the Iraq War, the quality of US intelligence in Iraq was quite poor, in part because there were very few people in the intelligence services who could speak and read Arabic. So their ability to actually check things that sources were telling them was very limited, and they were often led astray by motivated sources like Ahmed Chalabi, who were pushing particular narratives because they wanted the United States to do something in particular. But in the case of Russia, this is a state that the United States has surveilled extremely heavily, going back a very, very long time. And there's good reason to think that the Russian military and intelligence services are absolutely full to bursting with American spies. How else would the United States get the kind of quality information that it seems to have had at many different stages in the Ukraine war? The thing that has stood out to me is that every time I have tried to second guess the Biden administration in that war, and I've tried many times, they've been right and I've been wrong, which means they have information I don't have that they're not sharing with the public, that's not in the news. And I don't know what the content of that information is because it's classified, but very clearly they have good information. So my default position in Ukraine has been to think if the Biden administration is doing something, given how it's conducted itself over there over the last couple of years, they're probably acting on the basis of information I don't have. And that's something I now very, very frequently consider when I look at what's going on in Ukraine. Because if you just go off of the information you have, it seems like they're nuts. You know, why would they do the things they're doing? It seems completely reckless and escalating. It seems crazy, right? Why is it that they act as if the Russians don't have a viable nuclear deterrent? Well, they must know something about Russian military capabilities. They must know something about the internal discussion going on within the Kremlin. And we've heard snippets of internal discussion in the Kremlin. Some of this stuff has even gotten through to mainstream press of reports of conversations occurring in the Kremlin, especially early in the war. There were certain things that did slip through that indicated different kinds of views might be going on. But I'm sure that whatever does get through, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the actual amount of information that they potentially could have. And so if you take that seriously, what's happened with the people who are critics of U.S. foreign policy? They've completely ignored the fact that everybody who is a critic of U.S. foreign policy botched all of these different predictions about the course of that war. And that's not to say that the United States is right or normatively or morally correct to do what it's doing. It's just saying clearly they have information that we don't have. The information is higher quality than the information that's available to the public. And that means our ability to think coherently about the war policy and the war strategy is limited relative to theirs. They have an information advantage over us. That doesn't mean that they're going to get everything right, but it does mean that we will often not be in position to evaluate their claims. And this is the trouble. When you start to get into real serious foreign policy crises, there's an information gap between the public and the government. The government will say, you have to trust us. We have good information. We can't share it with you. A lot of the time, that may be wrong. But some of the time, and maybe even a lot of the time, it will be right, particularly if you're dealing with a state that our government has a very, very long history of very, very closely watching, with an entire subfield, as you might recall, that used to exist in universities called Soviet studies. That, for instance, Condoleezza Rice has a background in, President Bush's Secretary of State. These people went to school to study this state. They made studying what goes on in Russia their objective, their whole focus. And this is something that huge amounts of money was poured into over a very long period of time. So I think very likely the things that they are doing in terms of, they've allowed the Ukrainians to use long-range weapons to shoot at military targets inside Russian territory. As of
in the last couple, 24 hours?
As of in the last week. I think it was 5 days ago now, but it may be longer when you're hearing this, audience.
I just started seeing stuff about this within the last 24 hours. That's why I was saying that. Yeah, but so it happened
mid to late November if you're listening to this later. But yeah. So I think that a lot of people now are going, oh my God, are they crazy? Why would they do such a thing? Do they want nuclear war? Well, of course the Biden administration doesn't want nuclear war. The Biden administration must have some reason that it thinks it can do this without triggering nuclear war. What reasons could the Biden administration have? Does it have internal communications, which indicates a lack of willingness to use nuclear weapons? Does it have technical evidence that there's something wrong with the Russian nuclear arsenal? And one way that the Russians could potentially try to show that their nuclear arsenal works would be to use an ICBM that doesn't have a nuclear weapon on it, but some other kind of weapon, and fire it at the Ukrainians and demonstrate that that weapon can get past anti-missile technology, right? And that would be a subtle way of going, hey, our deterrent is good. Don't forget our deterrent is good. But this would be something that could be done without firing a nuclear weapon. The Russians can make it clear that their deterrent is good without actually starting a nuclear war. There are things they could do to show not just the government, but also the media that they have a credible deterrent. Why don't they do that? Maybe they have, while I've not been paying attention in recent days, done that. It wouldn't surprise me if they did. Has that become news, or is that something that is currently in intelligence? I don't know. Hey,
Sorry,
this is the trouble. There's a lot of information we don't have.
I guess it's just this. I think what you're saying makes sense, and I think it's a good sort of approach. But it actually seems like reverse conspiracy theory that you're doing. Like it's like this extremist opposite of conspiracy theory, where you go, no, they're good. They're well-meaning people. Like they wouldn't really want to start World War III. Like they must not want to start World War III. So therefore, there must be something else going on. There must be something else going on here. And I'm like, that is way more credit than I would ever assume on their behalf,
Well, if they had been wrong about other calls that they had made at earlier points, then I would be more suspicious of what they're doing. It's because they've tended to get the calls right with regard to Ukraine that I am suspicious of my own suspicions of them, because my suspicions of them have been wrong multiple times. I've been inclined to want to predict things that contradict what they're saying will happen multiple times, and they've been right in each of these instances, and I've been wrong. So that makes me think I don't have enough information to make these calls. Why is it that they're out predicting me? I think it's because I don't have enough information. And that's not to say that they have good intentions necessarily. I think that what they're trying to do over there is to put stress on the regime to the point at which it might collapse. They are trying to, and they're willing to cause an enormous amount of death and destruction and catastrophic violence for the purposes of putting stress on the Russian regime. And also, they have very blatantly and in public bragged about how they're using the war to redevelop America's military-industrial base. Joe Biden, in the press conference that he conducted after the debate, blatantly and openly and publicly bragged about how that conflict is helping American defense contractors to fund and finance the construction of an enormous number of munitions facilities. And those defense contractors have said publicly and said to their employees that they do not think it matters who wins the election in terms of their bottom lines. Since many of them are speccing into making conventional munitions to be sent to Ukraine, that must mean that they think that no matter who the president is, the Ukraine war will continue indefinitely at a relatively similar level of intensity. They don't think that Trump is going to end the war and cause those contracts to fall through, or for these conventional munitions to not be purchased. These are the little bits of information that we get. The thing is, I'm not saying that I know for sure any particular set of facts about what's going on out there. What I am saying is that a lot of the time when we are trying to figure out what's going on, we suffer from information gaps. There are things that we don't know. And this is something analysts don't like to emphasize and talk about publicly, because it causes people to be nervous. And it can hurt the ability of the analyst to raise money from people. The analyst will pretend, I know everything. I can predict everything. I'm super smart and clever. But that's not true. Nobody knows everything or can predict everything. This system is more complicated than any one person is able to understand. It's so complicated that when you get academics together at conferences, they argue and bicker and don't come to shared understandings of even, basic foreign policy questions like, is China rising or not? Is it a multipolar system or is it a unipolar system? These basic questions are not agreed upon by people. They're fiercely debated and discussed. What is the relative power gap between the United States and China currently right now? Who would win in a hypothetical conflict over Taiwan? These are questions that IR scholars do not necessarily all agree with each other about, right? So then you've got these people who aren't even scholars, who are just media personalities, journalists, right? They're not even people who have studied this stuff. Certainly none of them are scholars of Russia. They don't read Russian. They don't follow Russian reports, Russian media. They're not privy to intelligence. They're not getting briefed. And they act like they know absolutely everything about what's going on over there and that they can just say infallibly what the policy outcomes will be of different approaches or strategies. We don't know that. We can talk about what are some of the things that might happen. Certainly, the Biden administration could be wrong, and this could be a catastrophic escalation process that results in World War III. But most of the time when people predict that, it doesn't turn out to be right. Most of the time when people say, oh my God, they're going to start World War III, they end up wrong about that. So then you have to think about, well, why? And it's not always the case that you can offer an immediate argument which answers exactly why, right? I can't tell you what it is that is causing the Biden administration to think that they can get away with this. But there's probably something. There's probably something that they have that we don't have that causes them to think this will be okay. They'll get away with this. It might not be very good, but every time that we've doubted them in that war, they've been right and we've been wrong. And this is why the Biden administration treats that war as its big success. Because from their point of view, given their aims and goals and objectives, which don't need to be ours, but they're theirs, the war has been a total success. They've managed to bog the Russians down in a war that they thought they were going to lose. Remember, they offered Zelensky a trip out of there right at the very beginning. They were pleasantly surprised that the Ukrainians were able to defend the territory. They thought that Kiev was going to get sacked and that Zelensky was going to have to be evacuated. When that didn't happen, they were shocked at their ability to hold off the Russians with the little bit of piddling weapons that they had been given. And so then the Biden administration thought, well, why don't we give them 60 or $70 billion worth of weapons a year, which is maybe a tenth of the United States defense budget in terms of budget? What can they do with that? And this is what the Biden administration has been doing. They've been just giving the Ukrainians little piddling, limited amounts of Western weapons. And they've been testing and experimenting all kinds of new technology out there and just seeing what works. And they've been treating the conflict like a great big game for them. Because for them, it's just this pleasant surprise that they can stalemate the Russian army with like 60 or $70 billion a year, and they can redevelop the American armaments capacity. So if a conflict does pop off in Asia, it'll be easier to fight that conflict. And they can do this and provide all this stimulus to the defense sector for this little tiny amount of money, this little pinky finger of money. And all the other countries around the world see this. The leaders of these states see that the United States is stalemating Russia with its pinky. And they understand that, this is a demonstration of U.S. force, a demonstration of continuing U.S. military capability. And that's why Biden is so proud of it. For Biden, he surprised himself with his ability to do this. This is a better performance than he thought was possible for the Ukrainian military with the arms that they'd been given. So, this is something that we have to understand. Whether you like it or you don't like it, it's important to understand that the Biden administration considers Ukraine to be a shocking success of the order of, the Gulf War in 91, which the first Bush administration considered a shocking success. They did better against the Iraqi army in the first Gulf War than they thought they were going to, than most of the media and most of the commentariat thought. And the message that sent around the world in the early 90s was, wow, the U.S. military is more capable than you think. You think that because of the Vietnam disaster, that they're going to have trouble. But actually, the Gulf War is a totally different kind of conflict from Vietnam. And the U.S. military has no trouble at all destroying the Iraqi army and throwing it out of Kuwait, right? Similar thing here. People went, well, they didn't know anything about what was going on in Iraq in the 2000s. They botched that conflict very badly. They botched Afghanistan very badly. Who would think that they're going to know what they're doing here? But as it turns out, this is a totally different kind of conflict, which involves actually fighting an army, a state's army, along a front. It's a much more conventional kind of war. It's the kind of war that the United States is extremely good at, as
Hmm.
opposed to the kind of war that the United States is not very good at, occupying a foreign country and then trying to prop up a government there. That tends to not go very well for the United States. But this kind of thing is very much in the wheelhouse. And people need to understand this. You don't have to support or like any of it, but you do have to understand how they view it and what it means for them.
And so what it's likely to mean then is that whether regardless of which side is ostensibly in the White House, the U.S. foreign policy is learning from this success in the sense that they're going, yeah, Afghanistan, Iraq, maybe that's not the way, but this Ukraine approach, now that we can work with this.
Well, and if you think about it, it is the kind of original lesson from the Vietnam War. If you listen to Richard Nixon's foreign policy advice from the 80s and 90s that he was given to these guys, his advice was give weapons to these friendly states. If they have the will to fight, then the weapons will be effective. And if they don't have the will to fight, then it's a waste of time and money anyway.
Hmm.
Give the Vietnamese the weapons. If the Vietnamese fight, then the weapons will be effective. If the Vietnamese don't have the will to fight, then no amount of time, money, weaponry will make any difference ultimately, right? In Afghanistan, you give the Kabul government weapons. They don't have the will to fight, and so the government collapses, right? The troops of the Afghan army deserted their posts. They fled. They weren't actually interested in fighting. In the case of Ukraine, the Ukrainians have the will to fight. They're willing to do it. And therefore, the United States can give them a bunch of weapons, and the weapons are effective. And not just a little effective. They're effective to the point at which, with a very, very small amount of money relative to what the United States is capable ultimately of providing. Bear in mind, we've not fully mobilized for war with the Russians. Nothing about American economic life has changed to make it possible to do what the United States is doing in Ukraine. There's no draft. There's no rationing. There's none of this. None of this stuff has been necessary to completely stalemate the Russian army, which is giving it all it's got. It's conscripting enormous numbers of people and giving it all it has. And the United States has got the pinky finger holding it in place. Nobody
Matt
would have thought
V.
that was possible prior to this. Nobody. Not anyone on the left, not anybody on the center, not anybody on the right. This is a shocking thing that they've been able to do.
We've got a couple people in the chat pushing back on this idea of it being a pinky's worth. Sean says, piddling weapons. This is Sean Moon, not Middlestat, just FYI. But he says the entire NATO intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance apparatus was employed to preserve the Kiev regime. Without this intelligence, the Kiev regime wouldn't have survived. And Matt V said a tenth of the budget is more than a pinky, but point taken. So, I mean,
yeah, 10 fingers, right, guys? That's what I mean. When I say a pinky, I'm talking about 10 fingers. 1/10 of the budget.
Oh, so you were being accurate. Yeah, I mean, you could
maybe you'd rather say
finger.
index finger or something, but I'm also making a rhetorical point. This is not nearly as costly to the United States as people pretend that it is. If it were that costly, if you're living in the United States, your whole life would be changed by this. If this were hard for the United States to do, there would be much more public opposition because you would be being personally inconvenienced in all kinds of ways by the attempt to do this. But actually, you're being given opportunities to make a ton of money becoming an engineer who works in defense. That's what you're getting out of it. If you are an American who's young, you have an opportunity to go get an aeroastro degree and make 6 figures.
Eli says, "Wow, Ben, you're making the imperialist war machine sound kind of cool."
Well, this is the thing, though. You have to be able to understand it from its point of view to be able to critique it. And if you aren't
Mm,
able or willing to think about it from its own point of view, then your critique will always be a step behind, right? You've got to be able to actually personate the logic. You have to put yourself in the headspace of these people. And if you can't do that, then you can't understand what they're going to do. You need to know
mm,
how they think. You need to be able to understand the subjectivity of it. When Joe Biden was given that press conference, his case, why did Joe Biden think he should still be the nominee? Because his team had achieved a stunning foreign policy success. That was the case that he was making to the media. Now, that case was mostly ignored by the media, which mainly focused on just how cogent did he sound as he made it. But the substance of what he said in that press conference was quite interesting to anyone who paid attention. The thing is, what we discovered is that most of the people who talk about politics don't actually pay attention to what anybody says. They're only interested in what gets clicks and drives subscriptions. So they're not interested in actually getting into why does Joe Biden think that this is the issue to run on? Why is he
mm.
bragging about starting weapons plants? Why is he bragging about opening weapons plants in front of the television cameras? What is that about? There's no curiosity on the part of people to understand the way the state thinks and to understand the way people who are inside it actually think. If you want to understand whether it's possible for there to be a civil war, whether it's possible for there to be World War III, you have to actually understand how these people think. And if you won't do that because that's morally icky and uncomfortable, then you're just not going to understand what's going on, which is fine. But don't then pretend that you do understand and screech about it in front of followers and mislead people about what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think some people want you to just say this is an absolute disgrace. They are absolutely either evil or stupid. This is, we should
Would
be
that
worrying
help
about
you?
poor people here or across the world. But we definitely shouldn't
Yeah.
be worrying about bombs right now. And yeah, that would help, Benjamin. Just what
Yeah.
we need you to
Would,
do.
would it would it help me to just sit here and go, it's bad? Killing
Yeah,
and bombing people is bad.
please,
Okay.
Benjamin.
Killing
J-
and bombing people is bad. Killing hundreds of thousands or millions of people in Eastern Europe, it's a bad thing. It shouldn't happen. We should be working together to make that end. We should be trying to end it. Now, we could start talking about what will actually come up if they try to negotiate how to end it and why it's unlikely that they will actually figure out a way to
Nope,
end it.
nope, nope, nope. It's too big brained. It's too sophisticated. I'm trying to get my cope re-upped here because David Pakman broke my heart, and now I need
Mm-hmm.
something that is basically the same, Benjamin. You have to
Yeah.
just say they're bad and that
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
win.
Well, this is the thing. If you're just trying to get the audience to like you, then you just say whatever the audience wants to hear. But what's actually going to happen when they do this negotiation, right? So the first thing is that Putin is going to want the country demilitarized. He's not going to want it to be in NATO, and he's going to want Western weapons out of the country, right? Uh, Now, in addition to that, he's going to want the territory he currently occupies because he doesn't trust them to keep it demilitarized. Even if we say now, like Gabbard was suggesting that we say, we won't put Ukraine in NATO. Putin has now seen that we are willing to put weapons in Ukraine without Ukraine being in NATO. Indeed, we're willing to give Ukraine NATO quality weapons without putting Ukraine in NATO. So what does it mean now to say Ukraine won't go into NATO? It doesn't mean what it might have meant if we had said that 10 or 15 years ago, right? Now it doesn't mean very much. So now, we can say, okay, not only will we not put Ukraine into NATO, we'll make it a DMZ. We won't say that, by the way, because we regard that as an invitation to Putin to reinvade the country. So we won't just straightforwardly agree to make it a DMZ.
What's a
But
DMZ?
suppose that a demilitarized zone,
Oh, okay.
right? Turn the whole country into a military free zone, right? And even if we do agree to do it, Putin cannot trust that we will actually keep it a DMZ because of how quickly we were able to arm Ukraine. It was much faster than even we thought was possible. So a DMZ is probably not sufficient. He's going to want to keep territory because the territory is his hedge. The territory is the leverage that he has in the negotiation. If he gives up the territory, he has no leverage. We could just very quickly move weapons back into Ukraine and set up defenses in the territory he vacates. So he can't have that. So he's going to want a DMZ plus the territory. Is a US president of any party going to agree to that? I think it's unlikely, especially given the way the people in the national security apparatus clearly think about this war, which is the way that Biden expressed it, except probably even less politely. Because Biden was saying that in front of journalists and in front of cameras, trying to save his presidency. If he's willing to say that kind of stuff, what is it that they say in the national security meetings? How do they describe this? How do they talk about it? It's probably much worse. And I'm trying to give you some sense of what it might be in discussing it in this very unvarnished way.
Mm-hmm.
This is a perspective that people forget exists, but it's a very important perspective because it might be the one that's actually driving US foreign policy. So it might be the perspective that is actually in the driver's seat. And if you're not even aware that that perspective exists, or if you're just getting the version of it that they give you on TV, which is always going to be hedging and trying not to be too over the top with it. You know, they're always going to try not to look too violent with it or too aggressive with it. But come on. What do you think goes on, guys? How do you think they really think about it? What do they do when they're like together and you're not around and they're talking? Because this is the thing. If you study this stuff, then you go sometimes into the old files and look at things that these people say to each other. You guys got a little glimpse of it when you were doing you remember the WikiLeaks thing back in 2011? And they had all these transcripts of conversations between diplomats and heads of state. There was the conversation with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia and the American diplomat, and he was trying to get them to have a more aggressive attitude toward the Iranians, and he told them to cut off the head of the snake, meaning kill the Ayatollah. Remember that? You know, these people, they're not very nice about this stuff when you're not around and they don't have to put on a little face for you. We're talking about the state here.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the most violent thing that exists. The most systematically violent thing that exists is the American military.
That's probably what they wanted to hear you say. And there you said it. But I mean, you're also some kind of a state realist, though, aren't you? So, I mean, if it wasn't the United States being the most violent, then it would have to be some more violent body, right?
It has nothing to do with American culture or Englishness or being Anglophone or Western or whatever. It's powerful states in an anarchic world system where there is no good way of having good social relations, right? When we say anarchic world system, we're meaning there is a lack of a political apparatus which provides the basis for good social relations among states, meaning that when states interact with each other, they have trust problems that come from the institutional situation of the world system, right? And these trust problems cause them to become suspicious of each other and to get into competitions that can spill into violence, right? They try to talk to each other. They try to have diplomacy with each other, but diplomacy is not as good as the kind of social relations you can have internally, right? When you talk to somebody else and the conversation gets acrimonious, you know that if something goes wrong, the police could potentially get involved. You could potentially be convicted of a crime if you just murder somebody in cold blood in the street. This kind of stuff just doesn't exist at the international level. People try to talk it into existence by reminding people of international law, reminding people of the UN, the International Court of Justice, et cetera, et cetera. But really, in point of fact, these organizations don't have the ability to compel anyone to appear before the International Criminal Court. if they could do that, people like Dick Cheney would have gone to prison. But in point of fact, if a state wants to protect somebody, as long as that person doesn't haphazardly travel around the world to countries where they're liable to be arrested, they can persist with what they're doing. There isn't really a functional international or supranational system to provide security guarantees. So these states have to question each other and each other's intentions. And there are all these knowledge gaps that exist, even within the intelligence services, right? That's how the intelligence services can get things wrong. They don't have good and clear, transparent information about what's going on in other states. They have to go and collect this information, which is difficult to do. It's a major challenge for them epistemically, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's a even bigger problem for us epistemically, right? This is
because who are we? We just read the fucking journalism, man. The fucking media people, they don't know anything. They're clowns, these people with journalism degrees who try to cover international politics. They think it's all like a morality game where you could just identify who's bad or who's mean and then neg them in public and that will accomplish something. They have no idea how any of it works. They just stumble around. And then people read this journalist crap and they think they know what's going on. Come on. Look, I'm not sitting here saying I know everything that's going on, but I have some awareness of what I might not know. You have to at least start with that, right? How is it that the state even decides what to have the intelligence services do? They have some notion of what they don't know, that it would be good to know, and then they employ people and give them resources to try to learn these things, right? Mm-hmm. So they are very aware that they don't know everything, and they try to learn the things that they don't know. If you aren't willing to take into account that you don't know everything, I mean, if you were running the state, what would you do? Would you just disband all of the intelligence services and not have anybody gathering information for you because you know everything, because you read the news? Is that how you'd run the government? Come on. That's not serious. And you don't have to be serious about running the government. Most of us don't want to do it because it involves getting your hands dirty and doing all kinds of horrible, brutal things that we'd feel bad about doing. But the people who run states, they're not like that. They don't mind. They're perfectly happy to do this stuff. They're okay with it. They've decided that they're all right with being the person who does this stuff. So take it seriously. These are people who are willing to give orders to people to kill other people. They're willing to do it. Barack Obama is the drone striker in chief because he over and over and over again said, drone strike that person. Do it. Over and over again. Yeah, Barack Obama deported 400,000 people every year, more than double the number that is deported routinely in the Biden administration. More than double most years in the Trump administration. He was perfectly willing to say, go out there, use force. But because on television, he seems like a reasonable guy, people never pay attention to this aspect of him. Guy was a very ruthless president in terms of law enforcement, incredibly ruthless.
I want to come back right after this commercial break to the question of the guy. Well, how can we actually talk about someone like Obama as opposed to the unelected people in the background, behind him? We'll be right back right after this. What? Okay. I'll be right back. Chances are you're enjoying it, which means you would maybe like other stuff that Theory Underground publishes. So make sure that you've subscribed and that you click the little bell. It turns out only 40% of people who subscribe click the little bell. But I think that at least 20% of the rest of y'all just don't realize how much pushing the bell really makes a difference, especially considering the fact that at TU, we tend to put stuff out without warning. There's no schedule. This is coming from the space of my freedom. I just do this stuff when I can, and I don't want to live by a schedule because I'm sorry, I've got other things that are supposedly more important. All right. Well, with that said, there's also liking and commenting and subscribing. It obviously makes a difference. If you're one of those people who considers yourself a sort of recluse, well then maybe don't worry about the commenting, but you can at least click the like button. It does make a difference. Also, if you're listening to this on the podcast, please leave us a favorable review on your favorite platform. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
And we're back.
All right.
So yeah, to talk about it, like Obama, he's actually ruthless, but then there's a separation between what he's actually doing and what he's actually saying on television, for instance, or at his speeches. I guess I just want to pick your brain about this, because to me it seems like I've kind of just bracketed out any such questions. But it sounds like you're actually thinking, no, like Obama himself, he's saying one thing and he's doing another. I think when I've bracketed out the questions about the difference between the public image and then the person who actually signs off on policy or drone strikes or mass deportations, for instance, I think what I've done is just assumed that you get someone who's good at talking, they're good at showing up to things, they're good at saying the right thing, and they have basically nothing to do with the policy. They have basically not. I've just kind of assumed like that there's some kind of an apparatus running things, and it doesn't actually matter who's there, the personality, the character, so duplicity is not, like he's an image. That is all he is. But I think kind of from where you're coming from, it sounds like someone like Obama, it's like his personality, his character is actually like, well, there's this image that he's putting out, and then there's actually the ruthless kind of statesman. And it's like, is there actually a statesman there? Does his decision, do his decisions actually matter? Like, I guess I really just assume the deep state runs everything when it comes to foreign affairs. I've just assumed, no, of course, presidents have nothing to do with that.
So it's a dialectic between these things. There's a popular image of course, the people who are elected run everything, and it's more or less the way they're portrayed in the media. That's what they do. And then there's the other side, which is to think in terms of a deep state, a permanent state, which makes all the decisions. But you have to hybridize these a bit, right? So the elected administration, the president has a National Security Council, right? The National Security Council is a mix of people who are, we might call them deep state people. They're people who are heads of military branches, right? Heads of intelligence services and so on. And then you've got the people who've been brought into the administration. So they can be, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. It can be other people who have been brought into the administration. The president's National Security Council is there to help the president decide what to do in these situations. People present options to the president. The options are, of course, made in the relevant departments and then brought to the president, right? The president ultimately has to approve an option before it can be acted upon, right? But there's an opportunity for these people in these meetings to persuade the president. And so there's a question about how persuadable the president is and what's the strategy for persuading the president. And this has a lot to do with the particular person. It does. So, for instance, in the case of the Obama administration, there was a lot of demand from the national security apparatus, from Hillary Clinton, who was then the Secretary of State, who was picked by Obama and was part of the civilian part of the administration, to depose Gaddafi in Libya. And Obama was not confident in his own assessment. He was hearing from a lot of very experienced people around him that you've got to do Libya. And he wasn't confident because he's young and inexperienced in 2011 in his own ability to assess the situation. So he deferred to these people. And that the people he was listening to were the bureaucrats, the generals and the military, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, and then also leaders of allied states who were more experienced than him, who were also talking to him. People like David Cameron, Nicolas Sarkozy, who used to be president of France, right? These people were also talking to him. So when you look at his memoir and his account of it, he's mad at the generals, he's mad at the leaders of the European allied states, and he's mad at Hillary Clinton because these are the people who massaged him and got him to do something that in retrospect he regrets and considers his biggest mistake, right? So in this situation, Obama was overwhelmed with input, some from deep state, some from the civilian part of the administration, and some from foreign countries. And he succumbed to that input, right? But then a few years later,
this is how I feel every day.
Right. Then a few years later, the situation pops off in Syria. You get the Syrian civil war, right? And it escalates to a point where you have an Islamic State. I mean, the Syrian civil war really starts around the same time as Libya, but you get to a point where the Islamic State has a large amount of territory in Syria, right? And you have John Kerry, who's the Secretary of State in the second term, and some of the people in the military and in the bureaucracy, and some foreign heads of state coming to Obama and going, you've got to send US troops into Syria to deal with the Islamic State. And Obama saying, no, I won't do it. I listened to you people in Libya and it was a disaster. I won't do it. And they go, well, if you don't get involved, the Russians will get involved. They'll establish a sphere of influence there. And Obama goes, let them, I don't care. Let them pay the cost of trying to establish order in that area. Let them eat it, right? So there was a shift in view. Some of that came from more experience. Some of it came from how he reacted to what happened in 2011 in Libya, right? So in each of these cases, you have a president who's listening to a National Security Council and who's also in dialogue potentially with foreign leaders some of whom he respects and whose opinions he cares about, right? And these people are trying to get him to do different things. But ultimately, he's the one who has to sign off. And that's the trickiness. So with each administration, there's a question of which people matter. Whose opinions does this president respect? Who is in the National Security Council, who has access to the president, and whose opinions actually matter to the president? And is the president does he have his own vision? Is the president able to stand up for a particular vision of what he wants to do against pressure from the people around him? Or is he someone who gets easily persuaded because he's unsure, he doesn't have a lot of experience in foreign policy, he's maybe weak in terms of his character, or he has certain vices that you can take advantage of to try to get him? And people make this argument with Trump that if you flatter him, he's more likely to go along, or if you give him a luxury trip out to some resort in the Gulf, and he has a nice time, right?
Well, and they also make this point about, they'll also say Biden's just sleeping at the wheel and pretty much signing off on things while everybody else around him is running the show, right?
Well, and Biden himself, though, will also refer to a team of people around him that he trusts, right? I like to call them the Biden brain trust. These are the people that have been with Biden for a long period of time. They're Biden people rather than Democratic Party people. They're people who have been in the Biden inner circle, on his staff as VP, maybe back with him when he was in the Senate in some cases, right? So these are people that Biden trusts because they're his people. And then there's the rest of the Democratic Party, people like Obama and Pelosi, that he doesn't have the same level of trust with, right? And a lot of reports have come out through Axios and some other outlets that he's mad at those people that you might think of as his allies, people like Pelosi and Obama, because he views them as having backstabbed him, right? So what does he do?
Pelosi just blamed him, I think, for Kamala's loss, right?
Oh yeah, he's so mad at those guys. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when he's making decisions, he's probably going to listen more to his brain trust people. He might even bring members of his family to meetings because he knows he can trust them, right? So you have to think through the court politics of the presidency, and it does have a kind of court politics character to it. And to actually know what's going on, you have to stay quite up to date. You have to actually try to figure it out each time because it's not the same people every time, right? One president might really value the UK prime minister's opinion, and the next guy might think that UK prime minister is an idiot, never listen to anything he says, right? And this is why other countries worry about the changeover, because they worry, are they still going to have pull, right? Are they going to have
Right.
pull with the new administration? And it is something that can change. Now, this is not to say that the military and the intelligence services don't have a tremendous amount of influence. Of course they do. They're always in the National Security Council meetings. They come with a lot of experience. They present these plans and they'll say, we worked very hard on this plan. It's been in the works for many years. It's here available to you, Mr. President, should you choose to use it, right? And they know how to do this dance where they make a point of being deferential but respectful as they make the case for the thing that they very clearly and obviously think is the thing that needs to be done, right? If you watch a show, there's an old British show called Yes, Minister that very much gets at this kind of dynamic. It's a TV show, right? But it gets at this kind of dynamic when you have an elected leader and you also have bureaucrats who are not necessarily sure they want to do what the elected leader wants them to do, but also they can't blatantly defy the elected leader because the elected leader has the power to fire them. And bear in mind, US presidents have fired very senior military people before for reasons like this. The most notable recent example I could give you would be Harry Truman firing Douglas MacArthur, the World War II hero, one of the 3 or 4 most important generals in the country during the Korean War, when MacArthur was head of the military in the Korean War, right? And it was because MacArthur had publicly criticized him that he fired him. Presidents don't necessarily have to go along with what generals do. But if you defy the spies and you defy the generals, will they start to say things in public? Will they start to leak things that damage your popularity or might cause you to get into trouble? Yes.
Is that really the most recent? Is that really the most recent?
The most important one that comes to mind, maybe Petraeus. I think Petraeus was left in a little bit of a shaky way, but I don't remember all the details on that.
Yeah, because it just seems to me like it seems now I'll just play opposite day and be very simplistic here. I'll just be you're doing this like, no, there's real people and they're having real conversations and they're really thinking and they really have hard decisions that they actually have to make. And I'm just going to come and say, okay, but like, I just can't imagine that they would give someone like Trump or Biden a real sovereign choice. I mean, Biden was sold out from pretty much the age of 26. He was openly like proud of having pursued big money and being willing to literally do anything to win in terms of making donors happy and whatnot. Like I remember listening to that kind of stuff back in 2019, those clips where he's very proud about such things. But then it's like, okay, well, now I'll go full conspiracy theorist here. Trump and Clinton flew with Epstein out to that island a lot of different times. And there was, camera footage on everybody who ever made a visit there and the kinds of children that they were getting with or whatever it was that they were doing. And Epstein was a blackmail broker, right? He maintained a very careful list and records, videotapes on everything that happened. Are we to believe that somebody like a Bill Clinton or Donald Trump has some kind of sovereign sway in the National Security Council? Like, to me, it's just like, I don't imagine you could get in a position like that without being under the thumb of somebody who's going to fucking ruin you and everybody you love's lives if you don't do as they want you to.
There are things that you can do that will potentially cause bureaucrats and military and intelligence figures to try to hurt you politically, right? And there are things they can do to try to hurt you politically, one of which might be, for instance, blackmailing you. That can happen. But that requires that these people take a risk, because to try to blackmail the president or to try to subvert or undermine the president, you risk the president firing you. You risk the president taking public what you're doing and making an example of you as part of the sludge that is gumming up the works, right? The president has the ability to use the office of the presidency to direct very loudly and very vocally criticism at particular people or groups of people that he thinks are a problem or are in the way, right? A lot of it has to do with who's going to win in the public eye in that case. If they put out a story and you say this is fake news and this is just a malicious leak by someone who's trying to force us into a warmongering posture that I don't agree with, you could see how a president might potentially try to fight back in that situation. It's not as if the military or the intelligence services completely have a monopoly on the ability to influence all of this. What it really comes down to, right, is say the president fires a general and the general says, I'm not going to leave. And the general tries to rally the officer corps to expel the president from office unilaterally in a military coup. Would the American public tolerate that? Would the other parts of the government tolerate that? The answer is usually no, right? The answer is usually no. And because that answer is usually no, there is a limit to what they can do because they know they will not have the backing of the public if they try to take the president on straightforwardly like that, right? In some countries, the military has good reason to believe that the public will back it in a confrontation with the civilian administration, and it stages coups on that basis. Turkey, for instance, is a country where this has happened many times, right? One of the reasons it doesn't happen in the United States is that the military doesn't think it can prevail in that situation. It thinks that if it does that, it will not have legitimacy and will be unable to govern, that people will not obey it, and a civil conflict will break out. A civil war will start, right? So that means that when the president tells the general, you're fired, the general will usually go. He'll then probably write a book about how unfair the president was and try to campaign in the media to damage the president as much as possible. That's entirely within what a general might do, right? Or what an intelligence operative might do. They might make a case in the public eye. Maybe they'll even run for office. This happened during the American Civil War. General McClellan was fired and then ran for president against Abraham Lincoln after being fired, right? He lost that election. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There were people who wrote letters, and at this point we have all the correspondence, right? There are people who wrote letters to McClellan trying to get him to coup out Lincoln. McClellan entertains the possibility of trying to coup out Lincoln, and he thinks about whether or not he could actually do it. The thing is, he would probably not have been able to do it. Even in a civil war where he's commanding a large number of troops, if he tells the Union Army, we're going to go take out Lincoln, how many of those guys are going to follow him to go and do that? And this is what it ultimately comes back to. You're only as powerful as the people who will obey you. And depending on what you tell them to do, they may or may not obey. This is the very human thing that is still at the heart of the state for the time being. And we may get to a point where it's all technologically taken care of and all automated to the point at which the president can run the whole military machine from his office with nobody else's help. But we're very far from that at this stage. It requires a lot of other people to, at the very least, push buttons. And when you need other people to push buttons, then those people have to agree to do it. Or you need some way of making them do it. And how can you make them do it except by having other people make them do it? So there's somebody at some point, if you just think of it as a physical process, power is a physical process of one person telling somebody else what to do, then that person tells other people what to do, and so on and so forth, right? If you tell people to do things they won't do, then it doesn't work. So when you're occupying an office, no matter how many legal powers you have, no matter what it is that on paper you should be able to do, there's this question of, if I tell this person to do that thing, will they do it? What will they do if they don't like what I'm telling them to do? How will they react? Will they be able to hurt me? And these are the kinds of calculations that you have to make all the time if you are possessing power within the state, right? And the thing is, there's a ton of people, and they all want power, and they all want to make the decisions, and they all jockey with each other all the time. And there are formal rules to limit the degree to which this gets out of hand, right? But of course, the formal rules do not entitle you to do whatever you want without any kind of blowback. And informal blowback is certainly possible. But also, the informal blowback can be called out as a violation of the rules and used as the basis to get rid of somebody. If somebody tries to blackmail the president can say, this guy tried to blackmail me to make me do something that's not in the national interest. He's fired. You can listen to him if you want, but that's what he tried to do. You have that option.
That makes sense if we're talking about isolated actors as opposed to like deep
Somebody
networks.
Has to say it to you. Somebody has to say it. Now, they might be representing a group, right? There might be a group that they are working with. And this is where you start to get into, how do you actually do a coup? Well, how you actually do a coup is you build a subversive network within the state. Now we're getting into, like Blanqui level stuff. Okay? You can actually do this in the army.
Everyone take notes. Yeah. Here we go.
You actually try to construct a conspiracy within the state. Now, the difficulty is anybody you involve could take it to somebody who would blow your cover. So you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. But you can potentially try to construct a subversive network. And these subversive networks can exist for long periods of time, dormant, as a kind of constituency within the military that might be expressed in a crisis. If you look at what was going on in Greece during the Cold War, this is a great example of an army that had all kinds of subversive networks in it that the people in the civilian government were concerned about. And there was a genuine concern that if, say, a socialist were elected in Greece, that this anti-communist network within the army would act against that socialist leader, right? This is something that can happen. And in that particular case, it did happen. There was a colonel's regime established in Greece because the Greeks in the army became concerned about who was likely to be elected and whether that person's politics was acceptable to them. The thing is, this is part of the game of running the state is to try to get information on such groups and such factions and to have people who will tell you about them. And it becomes very difficult to have very large, very well-organized factions within the state that other people in the state don't know anything about, right? The larger it is and the stronger it becomes, the more likely it is that other people are going to be able to infiltrate it and have inside people. And this is the thing. Any kind of large faction within the state very likely has informants within it that report on what it's doing to other parts of the state. And this is likely true in all directions. So it becomes very, very difficult to actually pull off a conspiracy, especially if you are not going to act relatively quickly. If you're going to try to keep this thing dormant for a long period of time and try to have it operate across administrations, very likely people are going to find out about it. The longer it runs, the bigger it is, the stronger it is, the more quickly it needs to act or it will be exposed. Right? But this is just the very human thing of how do you in a group of people, because this is really what it is. It's a group of people. How do you and a group of people make a plot against the civilian part of the state? And it can be done. And certainly there are things the president could do that would so upset people in the military that they would plot against him. There are things. But it's difficult because the military needs to believe, if it tries to act against the president, that it will get a certain level of support from other parts of the state in doing that. Even if you can defeat by force one particular part of the state, if you can't then govern the country because you wouldn't have legitimacy to govern, this puts you in a dangerous position. And people are not going to want to do things that put themselves in great danger, generally, right? So state actors are very careful about plotting because it's dangerous to plot. It's that you get caught, you can go to prison, you can be shot. Very bad things happen if you plot. So people are often very haphazard about this. They act like the people who are part of these cells or these groups within the state have nothing to lose and everything to gain by plotting. Not at all true. Most of these people have good jobs, cushy lives, are doing just fine. Plotting is dangerous. Plotting is something you do when what the administration has done seriously upsets you, and you think that there is something you can do from your position in cooperation with other people who are nearby to effectively counter that. The simplest kind of plotting that we see all the time endemically is leaking, where you will see civil servants try to find ways to leak stuff without it being traced back to them that they're the leaker.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll often do this to try to hurt the administration or scandalize it mildly. The Trump administration was full of these kinds of leaks the last time around, loads of them, to the point where it became one of the major things the administration was doing was trying to stop the leaking. It was one of the 3 or 4 most important things the administration was doing in, say, 2017, was fighting leaks, right? But this is how the bureaucracy disciplines you a bit. Now, if you instead say anybody who is anywhere proximate to a leak is going to get fired, maybe even if they don't deserve it just because they're proximate, and you create a climate of fear about bureaucrats being fired, maybe you won't have so many leaks this time, right? But how many people will you actually fire? I don't know. But this is part of the game that's going on, right? From their point of view, these leaking civil servants cause them all sorts of problems. So they need to intimidate these people by threatening to fire them in a credible way, such that these people believe they might really be fired if they play games again, right? But conversely, these people will be looking for ways to continue to damage the administration because they hate it.
And so is that, I mean, I kind of just have to imagine that would be then the priority right now for this transition for Trump building up his new cabinet.
But you can't afford to lose the Senate, right? It's not just a game between you and the bureaucrats. It's also a game with the Senate. And the Senate will not confirm just anybody you appoint. If it was just the president against the bureaucrats, it would be easier, right? And this is the thing about the American state. For one part of the state to beat up on another part, it usually needs the help from some third part. And the way we usually think about this is in reference to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court is not the only third part, right? The reason that Vivek Ramaswamy likes to refer to the bureaucrats as the 4th branch is that they can serve this function. They can be one of the parts of the state which can buddy up with other parts, right? They're a player in their own right, separate and distinct from the elected executive branch. That's plausible. But then the Senate is involved here, right? Congress is also a player. And the Senate is involved because the president has got to appoint people that the Senate will confirm, right? So if the Senate is on the side of the bureaucrats, this very much limits the ability of the Trump administration to fight the bureaucrats, right? But if the Senate is on the side of the president and thinks that the bureaucrats are a problem, then it can empower people that will enable Trump to make all kinds of changes. And so this is why the Senate elections matter a great deal for this purpose. And there's a huge question here about how many senators actually agree with Trump's understanding of the bureaucracy and to what degree, right? Now, we've already seen that Matt Gaetz was not flying with the senators, so much so that he went, it's not even worth it to me to try to get through a hearing. I'm not even going to try to convince them. My numbers are so bad, I'm just going to walk, right?
Right.
But this will be the question for some of these other guys. Can they get through a Senate hearing? How do these senators feel? And one of the questions I like to ask people is, are there 5 Republican neocons in the Senate? Are there 5 neoconservatives in the Senate? Because if there are just 5, it's going to be really hard to fight the intelligence services.
Can you explain that? What is the significance of the number 5, and why would they have to fight the intelligence service, and how does this relate to the bureaucracy? I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the things that Trump people have talked about is going after the FBI, the CIA. They view these organizations as hostile to them, right? So if
is this what Vivek is talking about when he talks about the bureaucracy? This includes the FBI and everything like that?
The 4th branch. Yeah,
Okay.
So he's at the Department of Government Efficiency, which is not necessarily going to have the power to do anything about the spies, right? If he gets confirmed. Assuming that the DOGEB is a branch which will require confirmation. I'd have to check that because it's a new thing Now, new things, if they are, fully fledged parts of the state, they do usually require confirmation. Presidents can make new departments. Bush did this with the Department of Homeland Security. It was his way of reorganizing. And this was a reform of the spies by the Bush administration, was to put them all under the Department of Homeland Security so as to encourage them to talk to each other more, because of the view that 9/11 happened in large part because the agencies were too separate and didn't have enough interaction. Anyway, putting this to one side,
Right.
if you want to put people through to head these departments, someone like Tulsi Gabbard, right? They have suggested that Tulsi Gabbard should run the department which is in charge of, spy agencies. For this to happen, for her to run the Department of Homeland Security, there need to be, at least 50 plus senators that will back that. Now, if there are 5 neocons who view Tulsi Gabbard as a potential traitor to the country, because a lot of senators and members of Congress think of Tulsi Gabbard as a potential Russian spy, they really think this, right? If there are 5 Republicans in the Senate who think that, then they will kill the Tulsi Gabbard nomination.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because they only have 53 senators, I think is what they got. It doesn't even take 5, it takes 4 to kill it, right? So he can only appoint people that will get at least 51 out of the 54 Republican senators. Well, at least 50, excuse me, because he can have the VP tiebreak it, right? He needs at least 50 out of the 54. So as soon as you have even a relatively small contingent of Republican senators who don't trust that person to run that department, who think that that department is better off with somebody else, the nomination can fail. Now, he can appoint over and over, nominate over and over people that these senators don't like and try to browbeat them into eventually taking one of them. He can do that. He's trying that a little bit with Gates, right? Since Gates is pulled out, he's thrown up somebody else they're also not going to like, right? And he can do this thing where he tries to insist upon somebody over and over and over again. But also there's a political cost to him to do that, because when you repeatedly fail to get your picks through, it makes the administration look incompetent. And if you've noticed, opponents of the administration are going, see, the incompetence has begun. Gates pulling out that quickly already. They don't know how to count Senate votes. Look at them. They're in disarray. They have already had to give up on one of their picks, right? This is the way in which it will get spun. So if they have too many people who are defeated in the Senate, that itself will become a political problem for them. And they won't be able to actually run the departments if they don't get people through the Senate. Now, you could find some hardline MAGA people who will go, great, let's have dysfunctional departments. Let's not have anybody heading these departments if the senators won't confirm them. Let's go wild with it, right? But I don't think that's how the Trump administration wants to govern. I think if you go into a midterm in 2026, having done that, you're going to get waxed. And I think they know that they're going to get waxed in that situation. And so ultimately, they will be more willing to cooperate. And this is where the Marco Rubio bit we were talking about comes back into play.
Right.
Why did they pick Marco Rubio? They picked Marco Rubio because they want the senators to like them. They want those neoconservative senators to like them. They want to work with those people. They want those people on team. So they gave them something. They gave them the Secretary of State, which means the person in charge of all the diplomacy and all the talking. You want a peace made with the Russians? The Secretary of State is Jeb Bush's lapdog. Come on. What does that say? That Marco Rubio pick said so much about what this administration is going to be. So much about what it's going to be. But did you see people talking about it that way? Did you see people thinking about it that way? They went, oh, this is just a sap to the senators. Well, if he thinks he has to give them that, what does it say about how he understands his position? He doesn't see himself as in a position of strength if he has to give them the Secretary of State. Do you think that Joe Biden, when Joe Biden came in, did he give the left wing of the Democratic Party a major cabinet position? No. Did he give the Bernie-crats the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense? No, because he regarded the progressives, the Bernie-crats, as weak and as not requiring appeasement because they could just be frightened by the prospect of Trump into voting for him. He wasn't worried about them. They don't have a significant number of senators who can stymie him. He didn't have to give them all kinds of stuff. As far as he was concerned, letting Bernie have a seat at the table when they drafted the infrastructure bill was to him good enough. And for Bernie, it was good enough. Bernie was completely appeased by that because he viewed himself as operating from a weak position. And that confirmed the Biden administration's view of where the left was at in the party and what it could be bought off with, right? Ultimately, what you say yes to shows the strength of your position or its weakness. Giving the Secretary of State to the neocons says, we are going to govern with you. You're going to get a major say in our foreign policy decisions. Don't worry. Don't panic. We're not here to upset you. And you can believe me, if the Trump administration governs in a way that's wildly out of step with the neocons, Marco Rubio will resign and write an amazing book about how bad the administration is on foreign policy. And people will go crazy with it, right? Once you make somebody Secretary of State, you are giving that person the power to cause you many news cycles of grief if they're upset, if they're unhappy, and you persistently neglect them. And it can start with Marco Rubio's staffers are upset that he's being excluded from important meetings. And The Hill will put out a story like that, and that would be your first hint that things are starting to go off, and if they don't listen to him, he's going to cause more trouble. You know who did that in the last administration? Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris's staffers leaked stories to the media complaining about her exclusion from major decisions. And that's how we got to find out about how little respect the Biden administration had for them, right? Because what did they do in response to that? They marginalized her more. They said, oh, you think that you're going to get somewhere by whining to the press about us? Good luck. And then they stuck her on the border.
And then they were like, here, you really deserve to lose and faceplant in front of the entire country. So we don't want to win right now. So we'll just have you go. And
see, a lot of people, they don't like power. They normatively and morally, they find it gross. So they don't want to actually study how it works, how it flows and moves.
This is the tie back.
Be interested in it. You have to be interested in power to be able to analyze it.
This is the tie back
like
to
people will find occasionally when I'm talking about it, there will be bits where I sound like I'm enjoying it a little. It's not possible to study it without on some level finding it fascinating. You have to be a little into it, right? When the 2000 election happened and it's like, whoa, this determines whether the Social Security money goes in the lockbox. What? This determines like the level of security of old people's pensions. Oh, something is happening here. What is going on? Right? Like when I was a kid, when I was really little, before I got into politics, I was into like dinosaurs and I was into NBA basketball players, like 7 foot tall, Shaquille O'Neal. I was interested in people who were big in big dinosaurs that could do things, right? In the way that kids are fascinated by that stuff. Ultimately, politics is the study of power relationships and how stuff gets done. So to actually understand it, you do have to care about this. It can't just be about going, ew, this is gross, I don't like it. You're not going to be able to understand it if you have that attitude to it. And honestly, I respect very much people who are grossed out by it. It shows something good about your heart that you can't get too interested in it, right? Like some people will say to me, Benjamin, how do you even follow this stuff? It's so upsetting to me, I can't even follow it. Good. It says something nice about you that you feel that way. By all means, if it's too much for you, if it causes you distress, don't follow it. Please, because I don't want people suffering. People feel obligated to follow it and it just upsets them. That's no fun. That's no good. That doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody because when you're upset about this stuff, you don't think clearly about it. When learning about this stuff causes you to go, oh my God, this is horrible. And then you run into your little box, right? And then you cry and you post on the internet about this is terrifying. I'm so upset. Do you think you can make a decision in that mental condition that will actually help a person? Do you think that it will actually enable you to organize together with people to make the world better? Absolutely not. all that does is hurt you. It doesn't help anybody else. So if following this stuff is going to stress you out or cause you, that kind of mental anguish, psychological anguish, just don't do it, because you're not helping anybody by having those kinds of reactions to these events.
And that's the tie back to David Pakman and Sam Seder. And I think a lot of people in the chat right now, especially after we had Haas on the other day, are like, well, of course those guys are dumb because those guys are lips. Those guys are to the right of my favorite guy. But I would just expand this analysis out and say, guys, like, look, everything Benjamin is saying applies to every political streamer and podcaster you could possibly find. It's just, the point is the hope industry, whether it's left or right or some kind of center thing or whatever, it's not going to give you this uncomfortably deep analysis that also assumes there's real people doing real people things, right? I think the tendency here is to just go, oh, it's the state. And it's capitalist in this case. So you can just guarantee the reason that it does what it does, it's just because it's the capitalist state or it's the empire. Oh, this is in its interests. It is that sort of assumption that says, oh, well, it really wouldn't make a difference who's at the steering wheel because it's just doing as it does. Or no, the difference would have been to have Obama at the steering wheel, or the difference would have been to have whoever, right? Your analysis is somewhere in the middle between those two extremes, and it's a lot more granular. Yeah.
Right, because you could imagine someone who has socialist intentions being president, and they would really try. They would really try to use that office to do that, right? And then you could think about what would the other people in the state do in response, and you can game that out a little bit in your head, right? There are many things that people might want to do that they are afraid of trying to do because they have good reason to think that if they try to do those things, they will be in danger, right? But why will they be in danger? They will be in danger because there are other people in other parts of the state that will act against them because those people have a different way of understanding the situation, motivated by a different position. So you have to understand those positions that people are in and why it is that they think what they think and what it is that they think. Oh, no. I mean, it's a challenge, and nobody knows all of it all the time for every country all over the world. And that's why we always have to talk to each other and compare notes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good spot. We were wondering if we were going to cut this off after an hour, and then we were like, oh, we'll do a first hour and then we'll do a second hour. But there was some point along the way where I was like, no, I just kind of want to stir the pot a little bit and get you to really lay out how you see the scene here. And then I'll tie it all back into what I was saying at the very beginning about giving myself 5 years to really think about things. And simply say this. The way that I've bracketed out political science and keeping up with the punditry and the journalism and just really like the way that I've sort of completely stepped back from that is to kind of just go hardline Baudrillardian and just be like, it's spectacle. I can only like try to analyze its functional effects at the level of behavior and self-reporting on the actual human beings in my life around me. And I can talk about how the things that they're saying in the spectacle is having this effect on people around me. And outside of that, I really can't say much because I think maybe it's a sort of time energy fragility thing. It's just like, if I were to try to treat it all as like there's some kind of concrete referent there, and beyond it, like if you break it down, there's real human beings trying to do real things for real reasons. It's like that seems absolutely overwhelming. Like there are, to me, and maybe this is partially because I feel like I have bigger research interests right now, and the questions that I have are just different. But then I want to bring it back to the kind of enjoyment that you're getting from this in a very sort of simple Lacanian terms here. Your drive has something here, you're driven to get to the bottom of this kind of stuff. And so, as you said, you love it to a certain extent. There is a sort of enjoyment that you get from chasing it down. There's a kind of enjoyment I get from just hearing you talk about it, but it's a different kind of enjoyment than the kind of enjoyment that would make me feel compelled to read The Week, right? Like, I can't imagine what that would be like, but but we have you, and we're very blessed in that sense. And I wanted to kind of tie this back to your seminar and Political Philosophy 101 and all these great political philosophers with a question, right? So for me, what I'm doing for 2025, it's more or less on social analysis or socioanalysis, and thinking about it is sort of like part of what I'm getting from Bourdieu and Marx and Heidegger and all these other and Lacan and all of this is like it gives me additional concepts and sort of mechanisms for making sense of the ways that this spectacle, the media spectacle, has concrete effects on the people around me. And it's the kind of theoretical equipment that I can use to just think deeper about these more interpersonal kinds of things. It's not, and I can think about, let's just use habitus and field as an example, right? Like that can be applied to any place where there is symbolic capital to be won, and then there's some kind of like a shared sense for how the game is played. And really, you could say in any institution, there's going to be a field of positions that can be won and lost, and they're in relation to one another. And so that's great. I can apply that to any workplace I've ever been in. I can apply that to the university. I can apply that to any phase of life that I've been through. And then I can also kind of project out and imagine and complexify the situations that other people are in. So it's like, oh yeah, I can use that. The same thing with like desire and drive. I can use that. But when it comes to, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm going to be going deeper into, but the stuff that you're doing, it seems from a sort of superficial look at it to be remote to what you just did here, right? That there's this kind of granular, like IRL, realpolitik kind of analysis of American, not just foreign policy, but also just like the internal conflicts between the presidency and the Supreme Court and the Senate and House and then the bureaucracy, and you're kind of tracing that out, which is a godsend to me because mapping power is a big goal. If I were to pull out the things that we want to get into at TU, mapping power has been like one of the big things we're building up to, right? Not just understanding how capital works in the 21st century, that's part of it, but also just how does realpolitik function in the 21st century? And I don't know, but this is part of the question. Who are the wealthy families, and where are the relationships and the friendships and the allies, and what are also these deep animosities that it's just the stuff that we don't get introduced to it. We're peasants. We're expected to just go blue team, red team, me no like blue team, must push blue team lefter. Me no like red team, must push red team righter. And then the sort of centrist or independent positions between those. That is basically the options that we're given. And that is the kind of influencership that we can find, whether it's through mainstream or alternative media. And I've wanted to go much further. Okay, so all of that was to say, you're doing something that's much more granular, and it is a necessary step towards mapping power, and you're doing it in a way that I need it. I know that everyone else needs it too. So it's like there's this coalescence of things that you're satisfying when you do it. But how does it relate for you to political philosophy? What does Marsilius and Hume or Plato and Aristotle, what do these guys have to actually say? Or because to me, it doesn't seem like the people we're talking about take any of that stuff seriously anyway. To me, it seems like the last time statesmen read philosophy was sometime between Lenin and Mao. I'm not sure what point they kind of fell off, but it doesn't seem to me like in the United States there's anyone reading serious philosophy or theory, or that really informs the kinds of decisions that get made. So how do you think about the relationship between political theory and political science?
Yeah. So a lot of what I work on is legitimacy. And legitimacy is very much to do with, if I do something or if I tell you to do something, will you do it? Right? And what do I have to say to convince you to do it? And what kind of language would be useful if I wanted to get you to do something that you might initially not do? Right? And a lot of the time, I really have three different modes, Plato mode, Hobbes mode, and Marx mode. Those are really the three different frames of mind I can be in. And I like to put them together, but I can kind of hop among these three different modes. And you'll see it in terms of the general tone and focus changes when I'm in different modes. This has been a very Hobbes mode podcast, but sometimes I'll be in Marx mode, maybe when I'm talking to people from Platypus or Sublation, and other times I'll be in Plato mode when I'm giving you a talk about love and its role in the history of thought and so on. But a lot of what I work on is to do with divisions that get created within society and within the state. There's a tendency for a lot of Marxists to posit society or the people as a unit against the capitalist state, which they also posit as a unit, right? And then these things either correspond with each other or they don't. If they don't, then there's a need to resolve the lack of correspondence. And this suggests a possibility immediately of revolution to rectify the disunity. This, I think, was a plausible image in earlier periods of modernity, in the early to mid 20th century, relatively plausible image. But I think at this point, and certainly if you were to go back to, say, the late 18th, early 19th centuries, it would look a lot more plausible. But I think that there's actually a lot of division. And, Marx points out one, which is the division between the will of capital and the will of the proletariat, right? That's a breakdown in the unity of society and in the unity of the people. You've had this division into two separate and distinct wills, which contradict each other, yet which both operate at the same time. And the state being a mechanism for mediating between, the Bonapartist state as a mediating mechanism. This is already an acknowledgement in Marx that you don't have a unitary society or unitary people facing a unitary state. You already have some level of division there. That division, I think, has gone deeper and become more profound. And therefore, you have to follow things much more closely to understand what's going on, because the more divided these things become, the harder it is to keep track of all of it, right? And this is why when people want to talk about it, and they want to talk about it and feel confident, feel like they understand it, they will posit unity in things that are disunified so as to not have to do all of that extra work, right? And a lot of the time you get away with it. A lot of the time, if your notion of how the thing acts altogether as a unity is relatively sharp, we're able to get away with the fact that you haven't gone in and explored all of the different contesting power bases within that thing, right? But where theories are often wrong is in positing this unity where it doesn't exist, right? Or in positing disunity where in fact there is unity, right? One of the ways I was wrong over the course of the last year is that I thought that the Democrats would infight more than they did about getting rid of Biden. They were more unified than I thought they were in that case, right? Sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes there's a greater level of unity.
They were publicly very like, oh, no, he's great, he's fine, up until all of a sudden, like overnight, nope, he's just gone, right? So
yeah, there was a lot of cohesion there.
Uncanny.
Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. I thought that there would be less. I thought there would be more disagreement about Harris, in part because I didn't think that they would all agree to make the mistake of making Harris the nominee. But then they did that, right? They all made that mistake. I didn't think that all of them would make that mistake, or that so many of them would so readily make that mistake. I thought that was a mistake some of them would make, but that others would go, are you crazy? Harris can't be the nominee. She'll get waxed. As it turned out, there weren't enough of those people, or if there were those people, they kept their mouths shut because they didn't want to cause trouble. I don't know. But see, like, then we can think about, these questions about how divided is it, and to what degree do the people who think these things, are they willing to act on the things that they think, and what is blocking them from acting if they do think these things? What might they be worried about in terms of career, about speaking up, about, hey, maybe don't make it Harris, maybe do the mini primary. We saw some people do that, but they were mostly people on the outskirts, people without real influence in the party. Those are the people who said mini primary, right? Anyway, this is all further detail. The point that I'm trying to get across is, if you want to understand what the possibilities are from here, how we can get to a kind of social formation, political formation that unlocks the possibilities of human love for all people, as opposed to just a narrow set of people. So for workers, for proletarians, for people that are traditionally excluded from access to that, right? The only way to actually get there is to understand how this particular structure, as it presently exists, can be or will be transformed over time as a consequence of the agonisms that exist within it. And to be able to plot that at all, you have to really, really watch this thing. Now, that's why intellectually, I think all of it's ultimately connected. When we talk about legitimacy, people don't have to read Marsilius to nonetheless think like Marsilius, right? If you are in power, if you're doing stuff, then you have to think in terms of what kinds of arguments can we make to justify what we're doing. In the case of Marsilius, he's traveling around with Louis the Bavarian. Louis the Bavarian is trying to get himself crowned emperor without the Pope's approval. So he needs someone to explain why he can do that in such a way that people will agree that he can. Because if people don't agree that he can, then they won't obey him when he gives them orders, right? And then his life will be in danger, because if people aren't obeying him and they're instead obeying the Pope, who's naming him a heretic and a schismatic, then they might kill him, right? So he needs people like Marsilius to make arguments for why he can do what he's doing. It's actually incredibly important in that moment, right? And we can learn by studying how that happened and how that worked. We can think about what might be possible from here, what we can do from here, right? It's not that we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're not going to go back to the specific concepts, terms, language, right? But we might learn something from the way in which the terminology was changed, the way in which the explanation shifted, right? What were the conditions that allowed the explanation to shift in the way that it did? How do you operate within those circumstances? Right? What motivates someone to do what Marsilius did and go on that adventure with Louis the Bavarian, right? How do you get to a point where an institution which has had the kind of monopoly on legitimacy that the Catholic Church had loses it to a point at which you can declare yourself Holy Roman Emperor without papal coronation? How do you get to that point? What happens to allow that? We'll get into all of that when I teach the Marsilius topic. I'm going to actually do that when we do that as part of that talk. But this is, for me, all of this stuff is necessarily connected, and you're not going to be able to get all the way without paying attention to all the parts. And if there's a part of it that psychologically you don't enjoy, then you're not going to be able to keep doing it across a long period of time. And you do have to do this stuff across a long period of time to stand any chance of getting on top of even a part of it. And a lot of people, for various reasons, are not psychologically cut out for this. They're not able to sustain it. They find it too unpleasant, or it degrades their mental health. And this is why you have to have some of the vices that I have. I am a little bit of a control freak, really, at heart. I seem very laid back, but it's because I've been cooled off over the years. I've paid attention to this as a problem in myself, and I've done things about it to make it not a problem for other people. But one thing that helped me out was teaching, because teaching gives me something I can control, a place where I can set limits and decide what is good enough and what isn't, right? I can say, this is okay and it's not okay. What is reason? Reason is the setting of limits in Plato's Philebus. Deciding on the limit, deciding on what's enough. And I very much enjoy doing that for myself and for other people at my core, in terms of who I really am, right? So I channel this in a way that I hope serves the good and helps people, as opposed to something which just gratifies me. One of my favorite ways to limit is to limit myself, and to limit my own drive, to limit other people. it's my favorite way of getting on top of it. I can say, well, I could tell so-and-so to do this or do that, or that they're not doing what they should be doing. But today I won't do that because I don't need to. I enjoy that very much. And why am I so skinny? It's because I enjoy saying, well, I could eat that, but I don't need to. I enjoy limits, and I like to impose them on myself and others when I allow it. But I'm not going to let myself do that today.
Amazing. Well, that is something that I think a lot of us wish we could do, is get off on the self-imposing of limits. It's which is freedom, right? That is freedom. Telling yourself no and then being able to actually follow through on your own no. Like, that is a form of freedom, right? And if
Enjoy
you're not
your freedom. It's awesome if you can enjoy it. But if you can't, then don't do things that distress you. It won't help. You won't be able to sustain it across time. If you do things you really hate, it won't work. People think that they have to make themselves like stuff. No, you have to take what you like and find a way to positively channel it. You can't force yourself to be something you're not or to like things that you hate.
That's probably my problem right now. I'm sitting here trying to do website stuff and I hate it, but that's why I'm paying someone else to do it. But then I still have to make this, there's like this bridge from where I still have to bother with it to where theoretically I won't have to bother with it. But while we're still where we are, folks, the Theory Underground website, the new framework, which will hopefully be up next week, in order to be up next week, requires me forcing myself to do stuff I hate a little bit more. So hopefully it's just a little bit more. And hopefully next week, you'll all be able to see the new setup. It's going to be amazing. But for right now, it's just like pulling teeth.
I'm so excited for you, Dave, to reach the point where you're not caught up in all that admin and you have more time, energy to do what you really love to do. The fact that creating all of this wonderful thing for everybody requires this from you is so unfair and so cruel to you. And I'm really excited for you to be out from under that.
Thank you. If you want to help get me out from under this, then go become a subscriber to Theory Underground.
To Theory Underground.
Because the only thing that helps right now is money. It's true. I've got a lot of people trying to volunteer. There's always a line of people who want to volunteer, and I just want you to volunteer your money. It's the only thing that can help, because I need to be able to pay someone like Alexander, the guy who's actually programming the framework right now, to be able to focus on it. And volunteers are amazing, I think, in big organizations.
This is the imbalance, right? When you do something for workers, they have time but no money. When you do something for oligarchs, they give you money but they don't have any time for you.
Exactly. And when you do something that's kind of in between those two places, then a lot of people think that, well, volunteers could do it, but then you have to pay someone to manage the volunteers and train them. And that's the thing. That would be me.
And volunteers, because they don't have a job, there tends to be high turnover, right? Because most people can't afford to volunteer forever, not if they're going to do real serious work, which means that the volume and quality of work they do is limited by the political economy of being a volunteer. It's unfortunate, but this is part of why we don't have nice things, is that so many people on the left are not willing to do the work of actually finding a sustainable way of raising money for an organization so that it has the resources to do stuff. Because you need extraordinarily tight coordination to do everything based on volunteerism. And in practice, we've seen for decades and decades now, it just doesn't work. You can't make large-scale, significant, impactful organizations with volunteerism. It just doesn't get the job done. Look at what the charities and NGOs do. Even they pay their people money to operate them. Even the places that run purely on ostensibly voluntary charitable giving, they pay people. They don't expect their people to volunteer the time. especially at the higher levels of these organizations. It just doesn't work. If it worked, then you would see a lot of very large successful organizations operating on the basis of the model, which is something that people should bear in mind. If there's a model that you have and you don't see it, unless it's new, unless it in some way is taking advantage of something new in the digital, probably the reason it doesn't exist is that it doesn't work.
Right. Or the reason you do see it working where it works is because the people who, actually, I don't even want to say it this way. I'm going to back off and I'll just say people will see something that's extremely voluntaristic and horizontal, and they'll be like, see, that works over there at, who does Steam? The people behind Steam, like
Valve.
Valve. Okay, right. So people will say, see, it works over at Valve, or see, it works over at Google, right? And they're talking about this sort of modular, voluntaristic. And it's like, guys, those people are the 0.001% of the PMC. Shut the fuck up. Like, those people are being paid so much. Yes, giving them some maximal freedom now that they're out of school and they've actually proven themselves. Absolutely. But the thing is at that point, they know how to be self-directed and follow through. Like giving them an arcade area and a bed they can sleep in, and telling them that they're not going to have a project assigned. They just have to come up with something, is just a way of working with a person who's been the 0.001% of the PMC. Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but people need training to learn how to give themselves limits. And to give them the training, you have to give them limits first, in many cases.
Yeah.
So this is part of how you teach people to reason for themselves. You give them limits until they understand why they're being given those limits. And then they might reach a point where they're able to give themselves limits. Maybe. But you have to work with people to develop these skills. They don't just arise up out of the ether.
No, they don't. All right, everybody, we're about to switch gears here and raid Nance's stream. He's going to be streaming part 1 of The Century of the Self. It's an Adam Curtis documentary. It's a lot of fun. You get to find out all about Freud and the ways that he became relevant in the United States, the reasons that he became relevant in the United States, and the profound influence that certain aspects of his theory had over the father of public relations, which was just a way of rebranding propaganda. That's Edward Bernays. You want to find out all about that? Well, then stick around. I just dropped the link to that stream here in the chat. And once I've actually ended this stream, you'll hopefully just get redirected over there. Make sure to say hi to him once you get there. Make sure to say that we sent you. And we'll catch you on the next one, which will be this Monday. Isn't that right, Benjamin?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, stay tuned for the exact time. I have to talk to a few people really quick before we can get that scheduled. But it should be scheduled within a few hours from now. So thanks, Benjamin. Great time. And
Thank
folks,
you guys.
This PSA I'm about to roll is very outdated. Just know that subscribers to TU at the actual website get special things that they won't later. I think Nance was just telling me this on the phone earlier today. Stop over-promising people. Stop telling people what they'll get at the different tiers. Just start telling people, trust me, it's going to be amazing. Now sign up. Shut up and sign up. Let's go. All right. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of a situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Zizek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McCarrickers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful Patreon people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you. Okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? God, you guys,
Please.
just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.